Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Man Buns and Jesus. I think it's episode 15 of season 3. It might be episode 14. I really need to start checking that before I start these shows. But in any case, you are here, and we are continuing through First Corinthians. This is not a side quest. And we have an interesting cast this morning. Ben is off, I don't know, gallivanting somewhere in a cold, I don't know, he's on vacation or something. So instead, we have John with an H. It will be co-hosting slash guesting, whatever that means for us today. And then our real guest today, no offense, John with an H, is John without an H, John Niederbrach, who is, are you CFO or COO?
COO.
So Chief Operating Officer of the Pacific Southwest District, which is the district that John with an H and I both work in, are both blessed to be in. Well, I guess I don't know how you feel, John, but I feel blessed to be here. And the reason that we have invited John without an H on today is because our text comes from 1 Corinthians 16, and it says this. It says, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me." And just a little bit of context before we dive in. Because this is kind of like, this isn't a passage that your pastor's probably preached on. It would be a weird passage to preach on. What Paul is doing is he's instructing these churches kind of across all of his missionary fields to put together a collection for the church in Jerusalem who, by all accounts, is bankrupt. They're really struggling financially. So the other churches around are collecting to support the mission in Jerusalem. And that kind of leads us to why we have John on today, because we do kind of a similar thing today. You may, I don't know how familiar our average listener is with your church budget, but a lot of your churches hopefully donate to the district and maybe to the synod as well. And what that does is that allows the district to support churches who maybe need that support. At that point, I do want to invite you, John, to kind of just give us a brief overview of kind of how that works and how district uses those donations to support churches all over the place.
Yeah, so congregational giving is one of the main pillars of how the district operates. As congregations give to the district, there's several ways it's used. Most people are probably familiar with the district when they're going through a call process, and they're seeking their next pastor or an associate or a teacher or principal or whatever. So the giving that a congregation sends to the district helps to support our staff and our mechanisms that help to come alongside congregations and schools as they are seeking to find the people that they need to find and that God would have serve in their places. So that's kind of the big deal. But then it's also missions. We have regional mission councils at the moment that in each one of our 4 regions in our district that distribute money for different mission startups, different mission ideas, things to reach the community better, that congregations and ministries can apply for and receive a grant from the district. So those are kind of the 2 big ways that that congregational giving is then distributed to our churches and other ministries and schools in our district.
Just a quick clarifying question. So those grants that are distributed regionally, are those are only given to churches that ask for them, right? They're not kind of just distributed to different charities and groups.
That's right. Yeah, it's an application process. The regional mission councils review those in connection with our mission executive, Reverend Dominic Rivkin, and then yeah, they each have an allocation based on the overall budget, which this year was about $400,000. And they each get a fourth of that essentially. So each has about $100,000 to work with.
Sounds like
that's the first time I've ever heard Dominic Rivkin introduced as Reverend.
Yeah, I don't know how that came out of my mouth, but it did.
For anyone who's never met Dominic, he's a very relaxed dude. So
I only ever referred to him as Reverend Dominic.
The esteemed Reverend.
Maybe you guys are closer than I am. I don't know.
Very, very right, Reverend Dom.
I was on the phone with him as he like drove on the highway past my house a few days back. But he was like, "I'm stuck in traffic, but I kind of have to go." I don't know if he wants me sharing this, but I'm going to anyway. Said I kind of have to go to the bathroom, but I'm stuck in traffic. I'm like, I mean, if you pull off now, you could come to my house and use my bathroom, I guess.
That is the life of a deployed district employee. Absolutely.
Did he make the home visit?
He did not.
Oh,
Which
okay.
That would have been a weird ending to that. Anyway. Yeah, speaking of that, John, I think you, Dominic, and Mike, who's the district president, I was sitting in the airport with you guys after one of our things, and Dominic and Mike started going over their schedule for like the next months. They're never home. Like, really, they should just buy camper vans because it would be more efficient for them.
We have considered, buying a condo or something in different regions of our district. Just the numbers don't work out, especially with the real estate at this point. But yeah, because there is a ton of travel that goes on.
I think that emphasizes really what you were saying before when it comes to giving. See that? Look at that.
Yeah, nice.
Circle right back.
Kind
of with that, as someone who sees and kind of experiences these numbers, what trends have you been seeing, like as far as churches giving in support of the larger church, the larger body of the church? Because I have absolutely no idea what that looks like.
Well, I'm going to give you some sad numbers actually within our district. I can't speak for other districts, but I looked at some numbers this morning in anticipation of this. So we have about 250 constituted congregations. This does not include our mission congregations that don't necessarily have a constitution developed yet, but 47% give zero money to the district. That's 119 congregations at this point. I've been in this role since 2019, and it's been about that level, just about half since I've been here. Between $1 and $5,000, we have 84 congregations that give to the district. So that's about 33%. And then 5,000 or above, and we're talking annually here, 5,000 or above is another 33%, about 82% of 82 of our congregations. So it's a trend, and it's not good. There has been, I think a lot of it is just lack of awareness about what a district does. There's also the trend of disunity within our church body, which means congregations really aren't interested in the bigger institution. They're just focused on themselves because of various viewpoints on both sides of the aisle, quote unquote. So that's a trend. Overall giving just over time has decreased as well, which is an interesting thing just because there are more and more opportunities, especially missionally, that we're trying to put forward. And actually, I have to caveat that. I think we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick as people are seeing what the Pacific Southwest District is trying to do missionally. So they're catching the vision a little bit. But over time, yeah, I've gone back years and years, and it's pretty interesting how just over that period of time, it's decreased. We also have kind of two elements to how congregations can give. They can give just to the district in general, which means that we're free to do what we want with that money, quote unquote, to the general fund, to our operational kind of stuff, and also to missions. So like a congregation giving a block of money to us, part of that will go to support the regional mission council kind of things. But we also have congregations that give specifically for missions, which also feeds into something like the regional mission councils or other mission focused things that we would do. Those mission specific dollars have also decreased. So it's both our general giving and our missional giving that is decreasing. And I would say on average about over the last 10 years, it's probably decreased by about 7 to 10%.
Thanks for sharing all that.
Yeah.
I think that our district, at least as a newcomer pastor, and I think Josh probably would share this sentiment, but it seemed like there's been a very strong emphasis on the goal of the district to be a resource, and the willingness, as you were talking about, President Gibson and Reverend Rivkin, being on the road so much. I think that's evidence of, they're willing to go out and be where the needs are, to have the conversations, to see the situations, to be a part of making things better. And I don't know that every district functions that way. Of course, it's all about how they intend to be, but it's interesting to hear that the trend isn't necessarily going up for district support from a congregational level. And I think you're right when you said it kind of comes down to what their priorities are and how they handle the fact that there are always going to be kind of political, inner political divisions between us. It's interesting. I'm preparing for the national convention and reading through the workbook and reading all the reports and just kind of getting a sense for how some of those thought lines and things work. And it's just when we look at how Paul seems to be appealing to the churches in his day, all, obviously young churches, all mission outposts in a sense, none more than a couple of decades in existence. And a need arises, and it seems to be more of a case by case, ad hoc appeal for funds because Jerusalem's in a bad way right now. And of course, we've put more structure and institutionalized the process a little bit more, but the heart of it is still the same. We want to be able to provide for situations as they arise, and also to equip people to expand the kingdom as they feel called without necessarily being restricted by their finances. But question is, how do you combat the sort of consumerist Americanization approach of church, where it's not necessarily the congregation's fault that they feel this way, because we all kind of are conditioned to feel this way, but I'm going to a church that I feel good about, not a church that I necessarily feel ownership of. And especially, I think, in our region, where a lot of people come in and out from wherever their hometown is. I mean, Josh comes from Georgia. I come from northern Wisconsin, and that's true of a lot of our congregation members. And so finding the right church isn't even what's closest to me. It's not even necessarily what's the most Lutheran. It's where do I feel the best? And if everybody feels that way, it's hard to cultivate a sense of ownership over the church, congregation itself, and then ownership over the church body, whether it be regionally and district level or even national level. But I don't, maybe you have an opinion and answer to this. Do you feel like there's a correlation or a connection between these congregational givings and individuals and their contributions to just the offering plate as it comes by?
Absolutely, I do. I think there's, again, as you talk about priorities and ownership, if there isn't an emphasis on understanding that we're part of something bigger, it's not just about our local congregation, which is critical, obviously, but then I think that lack of a wider vision translates to the individual's understanding of, what is their stewardship? What should they be doing? And it's not just money either. It's if they're not experiencing the ownership of the congregation and the need to be spending their time and their, the talents that God has given them, that kind of whole life stewardship concept. I think if the priorities aren't set over the wider vision as an organization, that translates directly to the individual, the way I see it.
It makes me wonder how much impact the spiritual leadership of a congregation has, which is something when you were mentioning kind of some of the political, and for our listeners, anytime that we're saying political in this context, we're not talking about Republicans, Democrats, right? We're talking about different, I'll call them what they are, different factions within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Different slivers in our tiny little wedge.
Yeah, which is very different from, well, not as different as it should be maybe, but different from politics as kind of we see them on a societal level. But all this has me thinking, like I graduated with brothers that I love them to death. I think they're great pastors. However, they don't want to touch anything related to their district or the synod with a 10-foot pole. They're like, I am head down in my congregation, like that's what I'm dealing with. And I wonder how much that kind of attitude then translates into the congregation. Whereas, like the experience John and I have, the district has put a lot into equipping us and to help us be better pastors with the different trainings and the different stuff that's been available. And that phone call I was talking to you guys about, Dom, that was about potentially continuing to train some of us guys and provide some more opportunities to have those conversations on how to be better equipped pastors. And that's, I mean, just kind of musing. I wonder how much that attitude of, you know what, I'm just going to deal with my little section from the top then influences everybody else. But
one thing that I've appreciated from our district level is that there's a willingness, regardless of the availability and the schedule for an in-person visit, there's a high level of availability through phone calls and Zoom calls to bring people, not just pastors, but, or even just congregations, but a mixture of those. Our circuit meetings take advantage of, Dominic zoomed in to tell us about, some of the 110 initiative, and Mike's made himself super available to talk through some synod level convention preparation stuff, and even just responding to an email, making themselves available with text and phone calls. It's super helpful. But I recognize that not everyone has that advantage, and Josh and I are beneficiaries of probably lessons learned over the last 30, 40 years of what makes young pastors have longevity in their positions, particularly in pretty disruptive areas, and what doesn't work out so well. But yeah, so if you don't mind me suggesting, just sort of a movement of the conversation though, from district level resourcing and things. In verse 2, it says, hey, set aside a piece of your income, set aside a piece of finances as it goes along with how prosperous you are, as it goes along with how much your income you have. John, how do you feel about tithing as a person, as a church member, as a district worker, as someone who's connected to pastors? Probably each one of those lenses has a different reaction to it. And we kind of try to predict how people feel. We try to predict how we can ask for money in a church service and then, just like there's guys that don't touch synod stuff, there's guys that don't touch asking for money. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing.
So I'm going to start with the don't touch stewardship and synod stuff. So as you were talking, in my own church, I've been an elder for many years, and we typically intentionally do not talk about some of the synod challenges with our congregation in a way to protect them, because there's things that, you know, our phrase that we use is they don't need to know how the sausage is made. You know, there's stuff that's just not going to be helpful. Now, on the other hand, there's really positive things that happen in the synod and in our district in particular that we do try to communicate. And this isn't a shameless plug, but it's, you know, for the last couple of years, we've been putting out these mass emails called God at Work. And it's all just trying to help people understand God is here and he is doing incredible things through his people, and just trying to get a wider vision of that.
And where can someone sign up for that newsletter?
From our district website, psd-lcms.org, and you could subscribe to our mailing list.
That will be linked in the description for this podcast for anyone listening.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate that.
Got your back, John.
So on tithing, number one, my comments shouldn't be taken in a legalistic manner, nor should tithing be done in a legalistic manner. Paul is very clearly saying, you know, as each person may prosper is how they should give, and as they are compelled in their own heart. But I think, you know, going from the Old Testament, God absolutely knows how we are wired. And I think it's a good practice to tithe. That if it's 10%, great, if you can do that. I think we need I read a phrase recently about systematic generosity, or another way to put it is habitual generosity. And I think the way we're wired, it's really easy for us to be loosey-goosey about how we do our stewardship. If we make a commitment to a percentage, that just helps us. I mean, I think God knows that just helps us to do it regularly and do it well. So I think tithing is a good thing, individually. In my own life, personally, as I have worked into that kind of tithing habit, the blessings are incredible. You know, God says, test me in this. And I have really been amazed. And it's not just, hey, look, you know, God is going to give you financial blessings because you do this. It's not that at all. It's not that prosperity gospel junk, but it's spiritually. I mean, you're experiencing God being faithful as you are faithful in tithing. So individually, I think it's really important. Organizationally, it is as well. I know that we do have many of our district congregations do tithe. You know, they just take a percentage and give it to district. As a district, we tithe to synod. We do a 10% of what we receive in congregational giving goes directly to synod. So I think it's a good practice.
That was actually going to be one of my follow-up questions, was is the percentage shifted for organizations? Because I've only experienced a couple budgets, and in those budgets it's always like somewhere in the 3 to 4% range.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, at some point did someone decide that's the standard for organizations, whereas for individuals it's the 10%? But your statement right there says no, where the district takes the 10% approach.
Yeah, and I think that's been the practice at this district, at least for decades. You know, it's a 10%. You know, the straight literal tithe is what we do.
My treasurer is going to love hearing this podcast.
Maybe I shouldn't bring up this idea then, but one of the part of Josh and I's seminary education was a 2-week intensive course on practical kind of church management matters. My course took place a year, the winter, so a semester before going out on my internship for a year. And in that, we read a number of books on different areas of management. One of them was called Money Matters in the Church, and it talked really practically about how do you understand giving, how do you understand preaching around giving, how do you do capital campaigns, and essentially those are the 3 aspects of the book. And one of the points they make is, there's a lot of interpretations around what biblical tithing looks like. The Old Testament is clear in the covenant relationship God had with his people, that 10% of everything contributed to the spiritual needs of the people. And the setup was, of course, significantly different than what we have now, as far as church organization. And then in the New Testament, it's almost like, yeah, you get away from there being a hard line of 10%, but if anything, the intensity only goes up as far as how it should feel to be giving, and generosity should be something that, testing God, not putting yourself in jeopardy. I think Jesus has some strong things to say about when we manipulate people into giving themselves in generosity in a negative way, in a way that pushes them past their limits, but certainly at least pushing the edge of our comfortability. And so I've always found that helpful, to stray away from maybe like in a preaching perspective, saying like, you got to get to 10%, do what you can to get to 10%. Because all the people I look up to have said, well, I've kind of left that in the rearview mirror and found joy and found greater expression of my faith in, 12% or 13%. It's like, we hear these monstrous numbers above 10%, but that's one thing we try to do, is like, hey, tithing is an exercise of faith rather than an obligation that you feel, unless in times of emergency or need, like, hey, we didn't get hit by a giant tornado, what can we do? But
Right.
yeah, it's Josh, what do you feel about how does the conversation go in your church?
Well, the conversation I've always tried to have with people, and this is a conversation that has been had with me, is don't, and this is kind of in line with leaving the 10% in the rear view as you can, is focus on kind of always stepping forward with it. So like, say right now you give $50 a week, and that's kind of what your number is. Next time you sit down with your budget, which according to Dave Ramsey, I think he says it should be once a month. You should sit down and check your budget and see where it's at. You see, hey, maybe this next month we do 75 a week, and you're less concerned, well, where's my percentage at? Although I think, especially once you get to a certain point, percentages can be more helpful. You say, well, right now we're at 1%, maybe next month we go to 2%. But you're always looking, well, can we serve more? And I think when you start to shift the conversation from I'm just giving to this is a form of service, or even this is a form of worship, I think you're right, John. Both Johns. It can become more helpful to just look at where can we push our service forward, instead of finding where's our plateau. Which, like, I mean, I can confess to you guys, and I guess everyone listening to this podcast, like we're plateaued. We're hovering. I think it comes out to just over 10% because I like round numbers. But like the last time we did budget, I looked at it. I'm like, I don't know where more money would come from, because we want to stay alive and not evicted. So like, I can confess we haven't maybe made that push, and maybe we should. And I'm glad Chris doesn't listen to this podcast, because she'd be like, you're probably crazy for that.
Hopefully the podcast does not push your listeners to the point where they feel spiritually obligated to extend themselves beyond their means.
If giving more means you're going to be evicted and not be able to support your family, that's not what God calls us to.
No.
But I can understand your heart, Josh, because I think we're both pretty churchy kids. We come from pretty churchy backgrounds.
I found out I'm a 5th generation pastor.
Wow.
So you even more so than me, and so we have a way, I think, of sometimes. I'm thankful for the way I was raised in attitude around giving, where sure I was pretty resistant as a kid to.
Did you have one of those piggy banks with the different sections, and you had to put some into the giving?
I did have one of those. I think that's Dave. No, that might have been a Thrive-In thing way back.
The blue pig.
Yep. Yep. So I did that. I mean, we went through the Dave Ramsey Kids stuff, but it was just like something my parents did with our gift money as around holidays and things. But it conditioned us, and I know that's kind of a buzzword, but to be in the habit of that, and if not necessarily 10%, at least giving was a part of what we saw we should do with the resources that we had available to us. But what I say on a Sunday morning around giving, and what you say around giving on a Sunday morning, and what the district has on their website around giving, and then what people hear from churches all across denominations is different. Just as an example, I pulled up a website of a pretty big church here in Phoenix, and they have a beliefs page, and there's only like 7 beliefs on here. They talk about Bible, they talk about the Trinity, salvation, baptism, living, spirit-led living, and then like their 8th thing is giving. And that's their table of beliefs. So it's like, it's right on there. It's, giving is a major part of what they believe, and they have a pretty standard, pretty strict view of what giving means. And so as far as the normal person on the street who maybe has some church background, maybe doesn't, how do you guys feel the different messages around giving kind of hits the individual person?
I'll let you go first, John.
Okay. Well, I think number one, giving is not natural. And it's, our tendency is to hold on tight to what we have. That it's part of our nature, maybe even it's a part of our sinful nature, probably is. But so it's easy, I think, for us to fall into a trap of either feeling like, hey, all the church wants is my money, and or any charity for that matter, or it's, I'm taking care of number one. It maybe we don't realize we're behaving that way sometimes, but I do think that the kind of the cultural messages come to us that way, and they do affect us as individuals, which is, again, I think, to build on what I was saying earlier about how God knows how we are wired, and why that kind of tithe practice is just helpful for us, because of, like you said it too, John, that builds a habit. You from a young age, you had a habit. So now if you're not doing that habit, something's triggering in your head that says,
you feel it for sure,
something's not right. And then if you are doing that habit, you experience the blessings of it. It's even more so that it's important. So yeah, the messages of the world and our own nature, I think we're really susceptible to it. Which I just want to add, good for you guys for talking to your congregations about stewardship. There are many pastors that are afraid to do that and will never do that. That's a disservice to their congregations. Because one thing I've learned, again, personally in my life and in the congregations I've been part of, people are, even though they may have this innate need to not give, or that's part of their nature, when they are presented with opportunities to give and they take hold of those, it is amazing. And it's not just the money. I'm talking about using their gifts. That's something that's just hit me over and over in my life, is that when people realize that God has gifted them to serve in some way, that's a game changer. And that's this whole life stewardship concept. I think it's really important for pastors to talk about that and be very free to talk about that.
Just
to the credit of pastors who don't, though, because it's part of our habit. Like every week when we have this, there's a natural break in the service. We say, hey, we worship here, we worship with how we live, and we worship through how we spend our money. Every single time I say that and go through that spiel, I get intensely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And part of it is because there is, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a dominant narrative, but there's a narrative out there that the church is just a big scam for money. So it's like, I don't want to feed into that, but there is a reality that this is part, like, it's part of what we do. So,
Well,
Going along with that, actually, idea and the connection, I think, with what John, you were saying is, God wired us specifically in certain ways. And one of the wirings that most of us share, if not everybody shares, is that exercising certain activities, certain muscles, certain thought processes builds them up and makes them more habitual, makes them more strong, makes them more open. And I think, we start with money as like the giving thing before, and we talk about serving, and we talk about sharing talents, and we talk about that stuff, but the one that comes in every single Sunday for churches that collect an offering and that make that a part of their weekly routine, which not everybody does. That's the common denominator. Everybody in the room has some form of financial means, and therefore there's some level of giving that everyone could, if they wanted to, participate in. And I like to try and think of it as like a muscle where you don't have to start with a lot. One thing that our senior pastor says often is, I'm not asking you for a particular amount of money. I'm not asking you for a particular percentage. All I'm saying is, if you're at 0, make it more than 0. If you're at this number, make it, take what's the next step? Take the next step. And even if you're not ready for the next step, continue where you're at if you're doing something. And you're going to start to see where the opportunities are for either that gift to become more effective or for your giving to take on a new light. And it's kind of like, I've met very few people who regret the next step in giving that they've taken. I meet very few people who regret, the exercise they did that morning, or regret the change in their diet they decided to take on, or, who take on a discipline that's good for them. And even though on the front end, it looks uncomfortable and it looks bad and it looks like you could enjoy your life more without doing that, on the other side of it, they're like, actually, more doors opened up for me. Actually, I'm experiencing life in a whole different way than I did before, even if it's just a shift in perspective rather than a shift of circumstances.
here's a story from District President Gibson. In his years of ministry and in his teaching on stewardship, he made a guarantee when he would talk about stewardship. And he would tell people, if you're just starting to give, if you commit to an amount and you give that over a year and it has created a hardship for you, we will give you your money back. And he said in his 40 years of ministry, that happened once. So I think you're right on, John. I've never heard of somebody making that leap and then regretting it, which to me just proves God's faithfulness. So,
and that's actually kind of a good segue, I think, into with how what different messages mostly we as individuals, when we're doing giving, what does that send? What kind of message does that send to the world? For both of you guys to kind of think about.
It's a good question, Josh. I think
it's even one of the ones on the advanced sheet. Most of these I've been shooting from the hip, but like this one, this one was out there.
Yeah, I think the message to the world is interesting because everyone has an opinion on this issue, regardless of their relationship to a church. Everyone falls somewhere, and maybe they're altruistic and believe in giving regardless of your spirituality, and maybe they are totally averse to generosity in general, or even just financial generosity. And so I think whatever you do is sending a message, and the most effective message really is not the one that you put on the church website. It's not the one that you preach on the Sunday service. It's the one that you hear from someone you trust on a personal level. And it's interesting. A lot of people are looking for answers on this, and our church uses a third party for website management, and we get a monthly report on things. And one of the statistics is always what page on the website got the most hits. And 5 years ago, when they overhauled the website, the pastor at the time had put together a blog on tithing. And the name of the blog is, "Where does it say to tithe in the Bible?" And every month, that is the #1 hit on our website. We get 5,000 to 6,000 new visitors on it every single month, and it's been that way for 5 years. And we're not pushing it in any ad campaigns. We're not applying any kind of SEO specifically to that blog. It's all organic. And it's like, clearly people are looking for information on this. They're looking for answers on this. And the message that it sends when our people embrace and exemplify generosity, I think, is that it carries some value. There's something to it, rather than it just being another way for the church to get into people's worlds and take more control and power and money. And rather than it just being like something that doesn't matter, those personal testimonies, those personal examples of generosity, I think send a really valuable, positive message to the world around what the church is all about.
Yeah, well said, John. I was thinking, you mentioned before, Josh, I think this is an act of worship. And as we worship in this way, whether it's financially, serving in the community, whatever that altruism might, form that might take, people ask, and I know I've experienced this too, why do you do this? Why are you at the rescue mission on your day off? Or, why do you give money for this or that or the other thing? And it's, presents an opportunity to talk about Jesus. And, this is a response and an act of worship to what Jesus has done for us. So I think the message it can send is an open door, and to help to create a bridge to a conversation.
Yeah, well, and kind of distilling from some of the things both you guys have said, I think two things that when we give faithfully communicates is it communicates our priorities, and it communicates our trust. And what I mean when I say it communicates our priorities, say you have $100 and you have and you have to choose. I'm gonna completely deload this conversation. Say you have $100 and you have to choose between a hockey jersey, a football jersey, and a soccer jersey. At that point, how are you making your decision? Which of these three teams is most important to you? If you don't choose the hockey jersey, you have chosen wrong. But if you have $100 and you're choosing where to spend that, like you are giving a window into your priorities, especially when it comes to, and maybe almost exclusively actually when it comes to disposable income, right? If you're saying I'm choosing between rent and giving, it's like, well, that's not a priority thing. That's this bill has to be paid kind of thing. And then the other thing it says is trust, right? You get your paycheck. The first thing that comes out of that paycheck is your tithe. Like, you are trusting that God is going to make sure you're not going to be hurting for that. You're stepping out in trust that, we're going to be okay even though we're giving this out. And that's what you communicate when you give, is we're trusting that God's going to make sure we're okay. As opposed to saying, I'm going to put this in the bank because I'm trusting that this money is going to make sure we're going to be okay, which maybe is a aggressive or a crass way to put it, but yeah, I think never stopped me before.
The paycheck coming in is provision, and what you do with it is a response to that provision, rather than necessarily a step you take toward the next installment of provision. Generosity is a response to what you've got. So yeah, I think there's all kinds of opportunities for the individual to consider, to take steps to increase their generosity. And I think that's probably, as John, you were saying early on, that's how it starts for cultivating a congregational notion of generosity. I think as pastors, it's on us to really find a way to make that transparently clear as a value from an organizational point of view, and probably working with board leadership or elders to do that too, where it's not just the one guy up there asking for the offering, but it being a conversation point, on a regular basis.
that's exactly, I was going to add that point. It's important that the body of Christ is talking to each other about how God is faithful, and that you can trust him in your giving. There's an accountability piece to it, but it also just, it gives people peace to hear the stories that are told, from different people's experiences within a congregation. And, I think there's great benefit to that. And I think the pastor and the lay leadership sets a tone to be able to have those conversations and to hear those stories. So yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah. And so I guess starting to draw us toward the conclusion, for those of you who regularly listen to this podcast, I even warned them in advance. We do the takeaways, but before we get to our key takeaways, I think something that might be beneficial for us because of this specific podcast is, what would be an action step for and let's maybe actually stick to I know on the advanced sheet we have churches and individuals, but the reality is individuals listen to the podcast. To my knowledge, no churches play this in a corporate setting. If you do, let me know, because that's fascinating to me. But so what would be an action step for an individual listening to this? I listened to the podcast you sent me a couple days ago, John. Communication's not worth anything if there's not an action that follows it. So what would be the action step following this conversation?
From a super practical perspective, I think everyone has a number of a spend that they don't care about. So whether it's the cost of, where will you go for lunch if you forgot to pack a lunch and you're fine with spending, maybe it's $8, maybe it's $40, maybe it's $100, whatever that number is for you, for the number you wouldn't think about on your budget to spend. Try once a month committing to giving that to church, because you're not going to miss it, and it's not zero. So what if you're at zero, or whatever number you're at, if you're trying to grow, if you're trying to increase your practice, whatever that number is for you, and you can look at your budget, you can look at your spending history and determine, okay, it looks like regularly, like I'm okay with $12, I'm not okay with $13. Take that amount and add it, and just see 3 months later, how did it feel? Did I notice anything? Did that advance something? Do I want to take another step? What? I don't know why you're laughing, Josh.
Because what I framed that as is, make giving one of your impulse buys for the month.
Yeah. All right.
Good. Yeah.
What about you, John? What would be an action step you would put in front of people?
Well, I love what John said, and I would add on to that. Think about what's the number that makes you uncomfortable, and maybe that's the gap you're gonna try to cover over time. And then in all of this, I would say the action step is get into Scripture on this and see what Scripture has to say. One of my favorite stories related to stewardship is David's gift for the temple, right? I think it's the temple, where he ensured that he was going to give something sacrificially, that this was something that was going to come out of his pocket, not, otherwise. I'm forgetting some of the details of all this at the moment, but David said that I will not give something that is not sacrificial. So that's a goal that I think as an action step, put what that number might be in your head. And again, not in a legalistic way, but pray into that and look into Scripture into that. And it's not just money either. I want to keep emphasizing that. Maybe you're feeling a pull that God has gifted you in some way that that you can use, but you just haven't seen yet how to use it within your faith life. Pray into that and take a risk. Take a risk. Just like John said, start with that $12. Well, maybe you have some way of, maybe you've never served in your children's ministry before, but you've always wondered if that was something that you could do. Well, take a risk, try it.
If you're a member at Edgewater, though, first we have to background check you.
Absolutely.
We can start the process of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, prayer is also a practical, as John mentioned. Prayer would be my first step, and then the impulse buy. But
and yeah. If I was, you know what, I'm going to break my own rule and say, as churches, especially if you have a voice on a leadership board at your church, speak to giving to, especially if you don't, speak to giving to district. District is not sponsoring this podcast. I want to be clear. Like, this was our concept. We reached out to John, but this is something I believe is important. Like, whatever your experience with district is, we're called to support the church, big C, and that's more than just us. So if you have a voice on those leadership boards at your congregation, say, hey, this is something we should be doing. This is something that is good for us to do as a congregation. And kind of have that uncomfortable, what might be an uncomfortable conversation.
Right.
And then, especially if you're not at Edgewater, you can blame me. I don't care. Josh told me I had to bring this up. Okay, fine.
And I will, to piggyback on that, Josh, there have been multiple times where we've provided some information to a lay leader or even a pastor about their church's giving, and they had no idea that they were either giving nothing or not much, and they immediately went to their leadership or their pastor, and things changed. So take a look and see if it's in your budget, or how it's being handled, and have that conversation.
So with those action steps in mind, we're going to transition. One thing to take away, and if it was the action step, you can just say it was the action step, but what would be the one thing you would ask for people to take away from this episode of Man Buns and Jesus, with one whole man bun on it?
Man bun and Jesus.
I'm not redoing the graphics, John. I'm not going to do it.
Well, my takeaway is, for always remember, and this is a President Gibson phrase, you are part of something bigger. Within your congregation, that is the point of the spear for the gospel in your community, and be part of that. And also remember, there is a Big C church that has huge opportunities and that needs the gifts of its people.
What about you, John, with an H?
Yeah, I think that giving is an opportunity that's always open to us to grow in our faith and our relationship with God. And though the specifics of how that mechanically works are going to be different for each one of us, it's true that that's a threshold, I believe, in our spiritual development. And when you cross into the world of, all right, I'm going to give a little bit, it opens up to you new opportunities to know God and to know yourself before him. So I always try to frame giving as an opportunity for spiritual growth, rather than an obligation or an exchange or transaction. And I found that to be true for me, and I found that to be true for people that have been open with me about their own giving journey.
And to kind of close this out, I think my takeaway, and this is probably going to be something I incorporate into my own language because I really like it. Make an improvement of your giving your next month's impulse buy. I really like the way John phrased that of, what amount of money are you okay with just kind of casually pulling something off the shelf at Target or whatever. And make that, instead of, pulling whatever off the shelf, or make that part of your next month's giving. So with all that being said, Gentlemen, is there anything you'd like to shamelessly plug here at the end of the podcast? We already do have the God's Work in the Pacific Southwest that we'll be linking in the description. Anything else? Anything you guys are working on, or your churches are working on that you want to put out there? Is that a no?
I think so. I'd covet your prayers for our church body's ability to navigate conflict and differences of opinion, as particularly as that happens in a very tangible way at our national convention in July and August.
All right.
I will add my amen to that. That's exactly where I was thinking too.
This has been Man Buns and Jesus. If you have a friend who struggles with giving, or they want some clarity on this, go ahead and share this podcast with them. Hopefully it helps and doesn't make it worse. That was the goal here. And subscribe, follow whatever podcast platform you prefer. We're on all of the big ones, Spotify, Apple, Google, Pandora, all of those. And we do appreciate that. It's mostly just an ego boost for us, but sometimes we need it. So and we do have a Facebook page. We don't care if people like that or not. It's mostly there. If you have a topic you want us to talk about, if you have something you want to cover, if you have a guest you want us to try and get on. I did reach out to Mike Pence. They have not replied to me. We'll take on everything. We'll take on whatever you got. If you know myself or Ben Olschlager personally, reach out. You can just shoot us a text, whatever. If you don't, that's what the Facebook page is for. You can give us a message, and we check that from time to time. And I think that was all the shameless plugging I had to do. If you need a church in the Phoenix area, John's got you. Shepherd of the Hills, is that right? It's Shepherd of the something. Shepherd of the Desert.
Shepherd of the Desert Lutheran Church and Preschool. shepherdaz.church is our website. You can find us pretty easily, I believe. And our preschool enrollment is practically full for next year. But if you're interested, you can always schedule a tour with our preschool office. And we'd love to explore your relationship with Jesus together.
There you go.
Josh,
I have heard Shepherd of the Desert has some great preachers. So get excited about that if you give them a visit. If you need a church in Lake Orion, Michigan, check out Good Shepherd. And that's with Pastor Ben Olschlager. I don't know if he's going to be there on Sunday on account of he's on vacation, but he might be, and especially by the time this releases. So there's that. And I guess you could visit John at the district office, but
he probably won't preach to you.
If you're in Orange County, I'd suggest you join us at Christ Lutheran Costa Mesa, my church, or Christ Lutheran Huntington Beach, which is a church merger, and Huntington Beach is our new campus. So either
there you guys go. If you're in
and
that
Josh,
area,
your church, for the people in Corona and Eastvale,
you can come check out Edgewater. We worship at Rondo School of Discovery. We'd love to see you. I'll be there this Sunday, I hope. That's the intention. And if you're not in any of those places, find a church and be there on Sunday. We look forward to seeing you. And go in peace, serve the Lord.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Thanks for you and Jen's conversations and keeping the church moving forward. And John, thanks for everything you do through the district office and helping us navigate modern life.
It's our honor and our pleasure. Thank you guys for how you serve.